One more parameter section that we haven't discussed yet is effects parameters. Yeah, and in effects parameters, again, let's create shape, something like rectangle. And the effects parameters are exactly under the stroke parameters layer. Using the effects, we can achieve really mind-blowing effects and results, and I'll show you in the next modules how to use these parameters, specifically in the graphic design module. You will be able to create so many mind-blowing things just using effects. Just using a particular effect, like let's imagine drop shadow. You can achieve something like this, and you can create using inner shadows like vignette effect. You can create 3D style buttons. In some cases, yeah, some people say like, yeah, but nobody is using them. Well, probably if you haven't seen them yet, it doesn't mean that nobody's using them. Take a look at the new Ford Mustang, the electric one, the E-Mach one, and take a look at the dashboards that they designed. They're using this particular style for their buttons because they're using screen and they replicate the button from the physical world to their screen so people can easily understand what they should click at or should click on. So that's why this style is really cool. If you know, every single style is really cool when you know where to use it, where to use this particular style. And so yeah, let's stop talking. Let's actually start creating these things so you can understand how exactly to achieve these effects. First of all, what we'll start with, of course, I'll create frame first because it's just training purposes. I don't have to follow particular sizes for our frame. Let's create this frame, and inside of this frame I'll create the rectangle. For the rectangle I'll set 200 by 200, so you will have the same parameters when we'll start working with effects. I'll make rounded corners a little bit. I'll change smoothness to iOS style to create a circle so it look like this. Now I'll change the color in the fill color to blue. You can change, you can use whatever color you want, but if you want exactly to achieve the same result as I do, then just follow me. This is the color that I will be using, 0047FF, opacity 100%. For the stroke, I will not be using anything here, but honestly, let's go with something interesting. Let's use stroke, 2 pixels, 2 points, white color. You don't see it here right now, but you will see it in a second. And the next thing, effects parameters. This is where we start working with. So just click on here, and the first effect by default will be added drop shadow. Let's take a look at the anatomy of this section first before moving further. So we have this icon first, then we have drop shadow, drop down. When I click on that, I see options: inner shadow, drop shadow, layer blur, and background blur. Awesome. And then I can switch it off and switch it on and also remove it completely. Let's go, first of all, we will go one by one. Let's go with drop shadow. When you click on this icon, it says you effect setting. Let's click on effect, and now you see this panel here, drop shadow panel. And in this drop shadow, we see the blend mode, similar to images, fill parameter, to stroke parameter, and the layer parameter. We're not touching it yet. And honestly, in most of the cases, you don't need to touch it even at all. But what's interesting here and what we have to use is these parameters: X position, Y position, blur, spread, and color. Well, let's start with the simplest one, the color. It's the same as fill a stroke. You can choose the color that you want from this panel. And I'll go with a darker version of blue, close to purple, like this. For the opacity, I will set opacity to 100 from the very beginning, so I actually see the effect. Then X position. If you change X position, it means that this is where shadow will be casted. It will be casted like 10 pixels to the right or 10 pixels to the left. Sign minus when it comes to the value of the x parameter means it goes to the left. Positive number goes to the right. When it comes to y position, positive number goes down, negative number goes up. Blur, well, it can be only positive number, it can go less than 0, and blur, when it's 0, you see the exact lines of the shadow. The higher the blur, the less you see the shadow, and this is the effect that you achieve. And the final parameter is spread. Spread can also be negative and positive. And positive, it just imagine, think about it as a scale parameter, but just for the shadow. When it's positive, it just becomes bigger. When it's negative, it just becomes smaller. It's like multiplier for all of our parameters that we set here. And maybe you're thinking like, yeah, but why do we need this parameter here? It really allows it to create a cool effect, the realistic effect, when the shadow gets smaller, because the source of light is somewhere here. All the shadows, inner shadows and drop shadow, think about them every single time from the real world. Try to find the connection with the real world. We have light and we have a shadow. And how the shadow works? Well, if the light goes from the top left corner, then the shadow will be somewhere here. If the source of the light is really close to our shape, then the blur effect will be smaller, but the spread will be bigger. But not bigger than, it depends also on, well, the shadow always falls on some surface, right? Let's imagine on the wall. And the further the object from the wall, the bigger will be the spread and the bigger will be the blur effect. The closer element to the surface, the less the difference will be. Like, this is when, let's imagine, this is what we have when we put our shape just like a piece of paper, when we put it on another piece of paper. Boom, done. The only thing that the color will be different, the color will be most likely gray. Like this. Yeah. When you put a piece of paper on another piece of paper, this is what you will see. Now let's start moving this piece of paper a little bit further from the surface, from another piece of paper. In this case, and the source of light is still from the top left corner. This is what will happen. Now let's move it even a little bit further. 60, 60, and blur will be even bigger, like this. So this is what you will achieve when you just move the piece of paper out of the surface. But the source of light is still from the top left corner, and it's on the same distance from our first main piece of paper. If we move our source of light closer to the object, then the spread will be bigger, like that. So we are moving it closer, it will be like that. Moving it further, it will be like this, but the blur will be higher. Always when you work with shadows, in a shadow, drop shadow, think about it from a physical world perspective. Now let's go back to let's think that the source of light is exactly above the element from the top to bottom. And in this case, and it's still white piece of paper, then I have this effect. If I don't work with spread, like in this case, this is what I said to achieve this effect. if I don't work with spread, if it's still 0, and lots of people don't use what spread is, they don't know how it works and why to work with that, so they keep it 0 because they're afraid to use it, then you'll have this effect, which is fine, but it's not real. It's not realistic. If you want to make it more real, change spread to at least minus like 20, and then this is what you have. But in addition to that, because the source of light is closer to our first piece of paper, our surface, our back source of light, our background, which was white, is not white because the source of light is a little bit closer. So our background will be a little bit darker, just a little bit darker. Well, so the brightness will be, let's go with light. Lightness will be not 100%, but 99 or 98. And then you see your paper, you see the shadow that will be casted by our source of light, and also we see that the background is a little bit darker just because the source of light is not exactly white, because it doesn't have enough light to be white. And this is why you can go to different websites and you will see that the background, for example, is darker, 92. And you see a card that goes on top of it, and then you have a shadow that will be casted from this element, and the shadow here 10, like this, and boom, you have a realistic card, like a real piece of paper with rounded corners on top of some kind of surface. And here I will also change, let's imagine, our corner radius to 2 to show that this is our piece of paper. It's not 0, because it's really hard in real world to find a piece of paper that when you really look close enough to its corner, that it's exactly 90 degrees. No, it has a little bit imperfections, so that's why the corner radius will be at least 1 or 2. And this is what makes your design so realistic and so cool. So as you can see, just a little bit, and it creates this effect. And when you create, for example, another element here with that drop shadow, but because you know how to use these plugins now, as you can see, we are going one by one after another element, opening them, playing with them, and just to achieve cool effects. And boom, you just created. Let's go with something even lighter, maybe like this. And now you have this card, and on top of this card you will have some text that will be your main title here, and below it you will have a paragraph or description with some additional info, and it will be a little bit smaller, like 20. And now you just created 82, even 70. You just created a beautiful card using the drop shadow effect, using the rectangle shape, using the plugin Unsplash to add this image, and using some text. This one is too close, 0, medium is fine, and here we'll have 135. Boom! Beautiful, incredibly beautiful card that we in the future will be able to turn into a component, and then we will use this particular component to change our cards. We will work with them in the future, but I just want to give you the feeling that what you can achieve going step by step with these simple elements that we went through to achieve these effects. And then in the future, let's imagine you want to change the title to something bolder, and the color here will be lighter like this, and if you will use Roman and bigger distance between letters. And also this color will be not black, pure black, but you will use some kind of version of blue. And then you will change this to heading 2 and this one heading 1. And now you have one card, you have another card, Command P, unsplash, minimal, and choose another element here in the same gamma. But now let's, because this image, as I can see, is a little bit more like pinkish. So I select it, I go to edit mode and I change the tint just a little bit. I select this dot and press arrow one time left, set exposure a little bit to the top using arrows left and right, contrast, well, a little bit higher, and that's it. So now they are in a similar gamma. The only thing that I don't like personally here, that this card has like blends with the background. So I select this card and I add stroke, and not here, honestly. I choose our component, add stroke, and for the stroke I choose outside, and the color that I will use exactly the same as the background, but a little bit darker. You see, I just created the things that you just learned through all these lessons, how to create them super fast and easy using shapes, shadows, stroke, fill, and unsplash plugin. Then the more you work with that, the more you will understand that, wow, cool, I can create something like this here. Let's imagine that it will be a smaller size, just because I haven't prepared it from the very beginning. And now you have a gallery. And if you don't like the shadow here for this gallery, or you don't like something in this element, in this component, clip layers, rounded corners. Now all of them have rounded corners because we used components. And now when I change, for example, the drop shadow, I already don't see it because I pressed clip content, and you know what it's doing. Now I keep it here. Of course, I will need to apply then rounded corners to absolutely every single element. So that's why I'm going back to 2 here. But I can change the drop shadow to something else to make it a little bit smaller, like 30. Blur 40. Spread -5. And now I have a little bit different effect. Now my elements are a little bit closer. The only thing that I don't like is that for the shadow we're using just pure gray. We don't have pure black color in nature. What we do have is some kind of blue color for the shadow. Let's change it back to 10. And this is what we just achieved super fast and easy using the elements that you already know how to use, except components, but the components will be soon. Now I remove, let's remove absolutely everything. And let's get back to our effects, because we were working with our effects. This is what I wanted to show you, is where we are using all these things. Effects, drop shadow, 40, 60, -20, 15. So this is the drop shadow that I use for this element. If I'm working, for example, not with white piece of paper, but let's imagine that I'm working with a blue color. In this case, the drop shadow, what I would do, I would move the Y position a little bit further. I would change the opacity here so I can see it first. I would change the color to something, you know, brighter here. Blur, I would set to 100, yeah. and spread -40. What exactly the parameters to use, it depends on your work. If you want to know how I calculate them, I'll share them in the future in some lessons. Not exactly how I calculate, but how I calculate them for particular elements that we will create in this course. And in the future, maybe I'll create a lesson exactly on how I calculate them. Because there is a particular calculation for all these parameters. Each of these parameters depends on the previous one. For example, if I set the blur higher to make everything, to increase the blurriness, then I want to make sure that spread is negative enough so I don't go too far behind the image. Because if it, let's imagine I set it to 80, if it will be 0, it looks weird. It's not realistic at all. So that's why I set it to -40. So now all the blurred edges are right behind our main shape, and then I have just a little bit to show that it's actually about the surface. That's basically it with the drop shadow. Now let's talk about inner shadow. Inner shadow is similar to drop shadow. When you click here, you click inner shadow, but in this case, let's imagine that I want to show that where we can use, honestly, inner shadow. Well, let me show you. Let's change the corner radius, let's imagine to 40 or 80, smooth 60. It's not necessary, I just want to make it look also cool when we create something. We have this shape, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to change the color of the shape to exactly the same as our background. Control C, click here, now I see the shadow, but instead of using this particular shadow, I'm going to go here and make it something really small, like here, 4, 0, and 2 here. What I just created, I created the effect of that our, let's go here, 4 and 4, so you can see it a little bit better, and 20. What I just created, I created the effect that our shape that we just created is inside of the surface. In addition to that, I can create another inner shadow, and to do that, I'm not going to create plus and then choose inner shadow. No, I select the inner shadow, let's be effective, and press Command D, Command or Control D. And this is how I create another inner shadow. And for this inner shadow, I'm going to set parameters to -4, -4, and the color white and the lightness 100%. You see this incredible looking effect that the light goes from the top left corner, and in our shape we have, let's remove this, and in our shape we have these additional sections that shows that there is something inside. In addition to that, I can change the color, the fill color of these elements. I can make them a little bit darker because it doesn't have enough light as our surface. I'll change it just a little bit, 88. Even too much, 90. Boom. Now it's inside. My eyes see that this element is inside. And if you think, but where I can use it? Well, let's remove it from here. Let's take our element, put it on this side, and let's type here something like wellness. And let's make it bigger. And now I take this effect, Command Option C, select our text, Command Option V, and now my text is inside of it. I can change the size of my shape to this, or I can make a dot out of it, K, You know all these things already. You see how cool is that? This is the reason why I created this course this way. So you can go step by step, and by learning simple things, you understand how to create more complex things and just mind-blowing things. Remember, I showed you also how to create, how to turn strokes into outlines. Command-Shift-O, Command-Shift-O applied to text. And now I can change this shape. And instead of scale, I close it. I use Move tool, and I move this element up. And now I have this effect created. I even put wellness a little bit down, so you can still understand what's it about. Let's actually make it smaller. But it's outside of our shape. And this is how we can create a really cool effects just by using what you just learned. That's it. This is where we can use inner shadow. Got it? Again, the source of light and shadow. This is how it works. You will learn more about these things in the graphic design module. Now, this effect, how to achieve this effect, this real button effect. Well, let's create our shape. Let's choose the same colors here. Rounded corners, you know how to achieve them here. And now again, effects, drop shadow, but I'm going to create 10, 10, 20, and the same color. The drop shadow will be the same color as our element. Now I'm going to duplicate this, and I'll create drop shadow -10, -10, but at this time the color will be the color of the background. Done. I can even make it a little bit lighter, even white. Done. So now I have this button that is on top of our surface. And in addition to that, what I can do, I can duplicate the drop shadow, change it to inner shadow. Now change the parameters to positive for our inner shadow. Change the color to lighter version of this blue. Duplicate it one more time. -10, -10, -10, and darker color than this one. And this is, by the way, the first drop shadow. I should also make darker. And this is how you created like realistically looking button, and the same way you achieve the effect of the soft UI element. Let's set it to 20, for example, but the color of the shape will be the same as color of the background. The drop shadow will be just a little bit darker version of gray. The drop shadow is white. The inner shadow is just lighter version of our background, and this one is a little bit darker version. This is how you create the soft UI element effect. You can remove the inner shadows, and now you have this button just using drop shadows and inner shadows. Well, now let's talk about two additional effects here. Let's create a rectangle, and this effect is super simple effect, layer blur. When you click on that, the only parameters that you can change is blur. You make it bigger, like 200, too much, 100, and then you almost don't see it just because we don't have. So this was our shadow, our element without layer blur effect. This one is with blur, a layer blur effect. Where you can use that? Well, let's imagine that here go to Unsplash, Abstract. You have this element here. You can duplicate it, Effects, Layer Blur, change it to something like 50, make it a little bit smaller, put it behind this shape by pressing Command Option arrow down to change the position in this element, or just simply drag it below your main element. And this is how you achieve this effect. And if you remember that we can add multiple fill layers, just add it to make it a little bit darker. Now this is how you achieved this realistically looking shadow, the reflection of the element that you had before. And the final thing, the final element, is this Apple style glass effect. Why it's Apple style? Well, again, back in 2019, I created a tutorial how to create glass effect, and later lots of people started copying it, but I created it not from my head. I saw that effect a long time ago, back in about like 2010, when Apple presented skeuomorphism design. They had this glass effect already. It was a long time ago. It just got back to as a trend about like a year or 2 years ago. Today, some people are still using it, but they're using it in a different way. You can even go today to apple.com website, and in the menu, when you click on the menu, you will see this effect. Just a little bit, but you will see it. How to achieve this effect? Well, you need to create a shape, just any shape. But to see this effect, you will need to put something behind it. Let's take our shape that we created before. Now it's below our additional shape. Now click Effects, choose Background Blur. So we have background blur. We don't see anything. To see something, we have to change the opacity of our fill color. Exactly the opacity of the fill color, not the layer, not the opacity of the layer, but the opacity of the color. And when you're changing it, you start seeing the element behind it. You see that something like the edges of the shape is blurry a little bit. It means that when you go to Effects setting, you change the blur and you can choose the effect that you want to achieve. The higher the parameter for the blur, the effect will be. My recommendation is to go with something where you can still see the element. I mean the edges of this element, like this or even 20. But at the same time, change the opacity of the main shape to, let's imagine that you have white navigation and you have something on the background. Make your opacity of the layer pretty high enough. In this case, you see the element or you see the text behind here. Let's set it to 40. You see the text behind just a little bit, but it doesn't bother you because everything that will be on top, navigation, 20, medium. So the navigation, you still see navigation easily when you, for example, scroll down, but you also see that something is happening on the background. If you don't like it too much, you can change the blur effect to a little bit bigger, like 30 or 40 in this case. And now you see what will happen. Let's imagine that you scroll down and this is your navigation. You scroll down and the text that will be below is blurry, but it doesn't affect the accessibility, the contrast that you see for your main navigation. So this is how you achieve it. Again, step by step. You create the shape, you have to have something on the background. You take the shape, effects, background blur. Now change the opacity of the layer. not the layer, the opacity of the fill color to something that you can see the effect. Change the size of the effect. Done. You just created the blur effect. You can make it rounded, 400 by 400. And then, boom, you see something below. You can even create glasses. And instead of that, let's do this thing. Later you will understand how exactly it works. Oh, so yeah, for this text, exact text, where are our elements here? Let's remove navigation. Let's remove these elements so we see and work only with these parameters. Go here. I create another one. You don't have to follow me exactly what I'm doing. We will discuss it later. Now I'm just playing and you will understand what exactly to do here. For the text, I'll set effects layer 20. And here, background blur, I just remove it. The color white. And here the text should be blurred there and shouldn't be blurred here, which means that I need to take here to set to 100 and put this group on top. Boom, done. So now everything that is inside of our glasses will be what's happening. Oh yeah, everything, the text inside of our glasses will be sharp and outside of our glasses will be blurred. This is how you achieve this effect by using just layer blur or background layer blur. Now we covered absolutely everything. Go and play with them. Additional effect for your practice, try to create this card. As you can see, I just use card and just text on it. But for this card, I used the background as image, the fill layer as image, but I also used effect inner shadow to create this darker version so we can see white or light text on the light background, because without the inner shadow it's really hard to see the background. You can achieve this effect using linear gradient, additional linear gradient, or you can use inner shadows. In this case it will be much easier for developers. Inset, box shadow, inset, and this color, and this is how you will achieve it. Go and play with effects, create all of these different styles, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Now we'll not be talking about export, because export is pretty easy function. You just choose the type of the element and size. Maybe we'll cover it in the future. In the next lesson we'll be talking about components, variants, and auto layout, because those things we will need a lot when we'll start working with web design and mobile applications. Not too much with graphic design, but web design and mobile applications a lot. So that's why we will jump to them. And yeah, see you in the next lesson.